It's almost paradoxical that we usually hold on so tightly to things, even when they cause us pain. We cling to expectations that often go unmet, relationships that drain us, or even grudges that weigh us down. And yet, the more we grip, the more we suffer. Have you ever thought that true freedom lies not in holding on, but in letting go? What if I told you that the power of letting go is the key to liberate us from sufferings? If you're currently feeling trapped by your own attachments or wondering why peace seems just out of reach, stay with me. In this video, we'll dive deep into the profound yet practical wisdom of Buddhism to uncover how letting go can transform not just your mindset, but your entire life. 1. Attachment, the root of suffering. Now, let's return to the issue we mentioned at the beginning of this video. Here the question is, if holding on causes so much suffering, why do we keep doing it? The answer lies in a simple yet profound truth. We're trying to control what we cannot. Think about it. Can you shape people to align perfectly with all your desires? Of course not. Can you predict or control the situations you'll encounter in the future? No, that's uncertain, and we all know this. You can't control the circumstances and things around you to match your every wish, can you? Yet, we cling to the illusion of control, desperately gripping the uncontrollable, only to find ourselves more frustrated and hurt. It's not the events of life that harm us, but our resistance to letting go of how we think life should be. In fact, the human mind has an innate tendency to hold on to what feels familiar, whether it's the comfort of a happy memory or the bitterness of a painful experience. Ironically, this clinging only tightens suffering's grip on us. Imagine holding a red-hot iron ball. It burns your hand, yet you refuse to let go, believing that somehow holding on is better than releasing it. This is what attachment feels like. The harder we cling, the more we hurt ourselves. But clinging doesn't just create suffering in the present, it also shapes our future through karma. In Buddhist teaching, karma refers to the law of cause and effect, where every action, mental, verbal, or physical, plants a seed that will eventually bear fruit. Positive actions rooted in compassion, generosity, and mindfulness plant seeds of happiness and peace, while negative actions fueled by greed, anger, or ignorance sow suffering. But don't get it wrong. Karma isn't about punishment or reward, but is a natural law of balance, showing us that we are both the architects of our present and the creators of our future. Let's consider the infamous feud between the Hatfields and McCoys, two families whose infamous feud in 19th century America became a cautionary tale about the destructive power of attachment to anger and revenge, as a powerful example of how clinging shapes both present suffering and future karma. The feud began over a seemingly trivial dispute, a pig claimed by both families. However, instead of resolving the conflict peacefully, members of both families clung to their anger, allowing it to escalate into years of violence. Each act of retaliation planted seeds of further hatred, leading to deaths on both sides. The Hatfields and McCoys became trapped in a cycle of revenge, their suffering perpetuated by their inability to let go of the grudge. This feud didn't just destroy lives in the present, it created a legacy of mistrust and enmity that lasted for generations. The negative karma they accumulated through acts of violence and hatred shaped their future, leaving both families fractured and unable to heal. Over time, the feud became a symbol of how clinging to anger can snowball into suffering far beyond the initial conflict. It wasn't until years later, when descendants from both sides formally ended the feud, that the healing process could begin. This story vividly illustrates the reality that clinging to negative emotions not only causes immediate suffering, but also sows seeds that shape a painful future. As the Buddha said, attachment is the root of suffering. So, why do we not learn to let go in order to find true happiness instead of clinging to those that only bring us suffering? Second, practice letting go. Lesson 1. Let go of your expectations. The aforementioned story of the Hatfields and McCoys shows how clinging to anger creates suffering, but the same holds true for our attachment to expectations. Expectations may seem harmless at first. We all envision how life, people, or situations should unfold, believing these outcomes will bring us happiness and security. However, when reality inevitably deviates from our mental script, the weight of disappointment, frustration, or resentment sets in. This suffering arises because, as the Buddha taught, attachment leads to suffering. Release brings peace. Expectations are a subtle yet powerful form of attachment. They tether us to imagined outcomes, keeping us stuck in a loop of dissatisfaction when life fails to meet our ideals. The root of this problem lies in our inherent desire for control. We construct mental blueprints for how people should behave, how events should progress, or how success should materialize. Yet, the world operates on its terms, not ours. When things don't align with our plans, it's not reality that causes the pain, but our unwillingness to accept it as it is. This rigidity often blinds us to the opportunities and lessons hidden within life's twists and turns. Instead of flowing with the natural rhythm of life, we resist, creating unnecessary tension and stress. The path to liberation lies in cultivating a mindset of acceptance and flexibility. Letting go of expectations doesn't mean giving up on dreams or goals. It means holding them lightly, understanding that life may offer alternative paths or outcomes we couldn't foresee. When things don't go as planned, instead of clinging to what should have been, pause and ask yourself, what is this moment teaching me? This shift in perspective transforms challenges into opportunities for growth and discovery. It invites us to engage with life fully, even when it doesn't conform to our expectations. Moreover, by releasing our rigid hold on expectations, we create space for spontaneity and joy. Imagine planning a perfect day, only for rain to ruin your outdoor plans. Instead of sulking, letting go allows you to embrace the moment. Maybe it's an opportunity to enjoy the simple pleasure of watching raindrops or bonding over an impromptu indoor activity. Acceptance doesn't diminish life's beauty. It enhances it by enabling us to appreciate what is, rather than lamenting what isn't. By letting go of expectations, we liberate ourselves from the constant pressure of trying to control the uncontrollable. This practice fosters adaptability, allowing us to meet challenges with clarity and resilience. It frees us to live in the present moment, unburdened by the weight of unmet desires. Letting go, in essence, enriches our lives, helping us find harmony within ourselves and with the ever-changing world around us. Through this practice, we cultivate the profound ability to embrace life as it unfolds, discovering peace and fulfillment in its imperfections. Lesson 2. Letting go of the past. The lesson of letting go of expectations seamlessly connects to the broader practice of releasing our attachment to the past. If clinging to expected futures causes frustration, holding on to the past, whether it's fond memories, painful experiences, or past justifications, keeps us tethered to suffering. The Buddha's wisdom reminds us, do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future, concentrate the mind on the present moment. When we allow the past to dominate our thoughts, we become trapped in cycles of regret, resentment, or nostalgia, unable to engage fully with the present. This attachment manifests in many ways, replaying old wounds, longing for what was lost, or letting past failures define our decisions today. It's as if we're carrying an invisible load that grows heavier with every memory we cling to, weighing us down and hindering progress. Much like the frustration of unmet expectations, this resistance blinds us to the opportunities and joys that exist right now. Instead of adapting and evolving, we become fixated on a static version of ourselves and the world, resisting the natural flow of change. The key to liberation lies in letting go, not by erasing the past, but by acknowledging its lessons without allowing it to define us. Letting go of painful experiences involves understanding their impact and then choosing to release their grip. Mindfulness becomes a powerful tool here, helping us anchor ourselves in the present moment. By focusing on the here and now, we can step out of the loop of replaying old memories and into a space of healing and growth. Imagine a river flowing freely, its waters moving forward without resistance. When we cling to the past, it's like damming the river, creating stagnation and tension. Letting go clears the way, allowing life's energy to move naturally, carrying us toward new opportunities and personal transformation. By releasing the need to justify our present actions through past experiences, we embrace the freedom to redefine ourselves and make choices aligned with who we are today. The benefits of this practice ripple through every aspect of life. We cultivate flexibility, allowing us to adapt to life's twists and turns with grace. We open ourselves to joy and spontaneity, unhindered by the weight of old burdens. And most importantly, we reclaim our power to shape the future, not as prisoners of the past, but as conscious creators of the present. Letting go of the past, like releasing expectations, enriches our lives, bringing peace, resilience, and a profound sense of harmony with the ever-changing flow of existence. Lesson 3. Let go of your fear of the future. In addition to letting go of the past, releasing the fear of the future is equally important in the pursuit of freedom. When we fixate on what might happen, our minds become consumed by anxiety, leaving little room to experience joy or clarity in the present. As the Buddha wisely said, the secret of health for both mind and body is not to mourn for the past, worry about the future, or anticipate troubles, but to live in the present moment wisely and earnestly. Fear of the unknown binds us to imagined outcomes, often ones that may never come to pass. And this mental preoccupation drains our energy and limits our potential. At its core, this fear stems from our desire to control life's uncertainties. We try to anticipate every possibility, hoping to avoid hardship, but life's inherent unpredictability makes this an impossible task. Instead of protecting us, this need for control only intensifies our suffering. By fearing what we cannot predict or manage, we lose the ability to navigate the natural flow of life, turning our focus away from the opportunities and experiences unfolding right now. To counteract this fear, we must develop a mindset of trust and courage. Letting go of the need to control the future begins with acknowledging its uncertainty and accepting it as a fundamental truth of existence. This doesn't mean passivity or apathy. Rather, it empowers us to act with resilience and adaptability. Mindfulness becomes an invaluable practice here. Grounding ourselves in the present moment allows us to stop fixating on what-ifs and start engaging with what is. For example, instead of worrying about a meeting tomorrow, focus on preparing calmly today and trust in your ability to handle whatever arises. The benefits of this shift are profound. By letting go of fear, we create space for inner peace, freeing our minds from the endless cycle of stress. This openness allows us to approach life with curiosity and flexibility, welcoming challenges as opportunities for growth rather than obstacles to avoid. We also gain a renewed appreciation for the present, experiencing it fully without the shadow of imagined troubles. Embracing the uncertainty of the future liberates us. It strengthens our ability to face life's twists and turns with courage and clarity, while fostering a deeper connection to the present moment. Letting go of fear, like releasing the past and expectations, helps us move forward with confidence, ready to embrace whatever life has in store. Lesson 4. Let go of the need to control. Beside building on the idea of releasing fear of the future, letting go of the need to control everything is an essential step in cultivating peace and freedom. The desire for control may feel like a way to create stability in our lives, but more often than not, it is the root of our suffering. Life's unpredictability is an undeniable reality, yet we persist in clinging to the illusion that we can dictate outcomes and shape the world according to our will. As the Buddha taught us, to live a pure, unselfish life, one must count nothing as one's own in the midst of abundance. This teaching encourages us to relinquish our attachment not only to material things, but also to the need for control, which binds us to endless cycles of frustration and stress. The root of this need for control lies in fear of the unknown, fear of failure, and fear of loss. In our effort to manage every detail of our lives, we expend enormous mental and emotional energy trying to mold situations, manipulate outcomes, and even influence how others act. But life, much like holding water in a clenched fist, resists these efforts. The tighter we hold on, the more it slips through our grasp, leaving us drained, disheartened, and overwhelmed. This relentless struggle not only distances us from the present moment, but also blinds us to the beauty and opportunities inherent in life's unpredictability. A powerful Buddhist parable illustrates this point. Picture a man caught in a raging river, struggling desperately to swim against the current to reach the shore. He exhausts himself, making no progress and risking his life. Finally, when he surrenders to the flow of the water, he discovers that the current naturally carries him to safety. The lesson here is clear. When we stop fighting against life's natural rhythm and allow ourselves to move with its flow, we find a path forward with far less struggle. To begin letting go of the need for control, we must first accept that uncertainty is an intrinsic part of life. This acceptance doesn't mean passivity or giving up. Rather, it is a recognition that we cannot dictate everything around us, but we can choose how we respond. Focusing on what lies within our control, our thoughts, attitudes, and actions, empowers us to navigate life's twists and turns with clarity and intention. For example, instead of stressing over how others might react to our decisions, we can focus on expressing ourselves with honesty and kindness, trusting that the rest will unfold as it should. By letting go, we free ourselves from the constant pressure of trying to manipulate the unmanageable. This creates mental and emotional space for adaptability and resilience. When we stop clinging to control, we cultivate the flexibility to embrace change, turning perceived obstacles into opportunities for growth. Moreover, we discover a sense of ease and harmony as we learn to trust in life's natural flow rather than resist it. Finally, letting go of the need for control allows us to reclaim our energy and focus on what truly matters, our inner well-being and how we show up in the world. As we surrender the illusion of control, we become like the man in the parable, carried by life's current to where we are meant to be. This practice not only liberates us from unnecessary suffering, but also reveals a deeper truth. Peace is found not in controlling every detail, but in trusting the journey and embracing its uncertainty with an open heart. Lesson 5. Let go of incorrect conclusions about yourself. Continuing the journey of letting go, releasing incorrect conclusions about yourself is a transformative practice that brings clarity and self-acceptance. Often we carry distorted beliefs about who we are, ideas shaped by past failures, societal judgments, or the critical voices in our own minds. These conclusions can lead to self-doubt, feelings of unworthiness, and a diminished sense of purpose. As the Buddha taught, you are what you think. All that you are arises from your thoughts. With your thoughts, you make the world. This wisdom highlights the importance of freeing ourselves from harmful self-perceptions, which shape not only how we see ourselves, but also how we interact with the world. The root of these incorrect conclusions often lies in attachment to past experiences and external validation. When we make mistakes or face criticism, we internalize these moments, allowing them to define us. For example, a single failure can lead to the belief, "I am not good enough," which then influences future decisions and limits growth. Similarly, societal standards and expectations can impose labels that obscure our true nature. Over time, these false identities solidify into a rigid self-concept, trapping us in cycles of self-judgment and disconnection from our authentic selves. Buddhism further teaches that this attachment to a fixed self stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of reality, the illusion of a permanent, independent I. The Buddha described this self as emptiness, a fluid state constantly shaped by fleeting thoughts, sensations, and interactions with the world. For instance, when we experience a smell, an emotion, or a memory, we cannot pinpoint a central self that perceives it. Where in the mind does the thought or sensation occur? Upon reflection, we realize that this self we cling to is like a blank canvas momentarily filled by the ever-changing brushstrokes of experience. This illusion of a fixed self creates suffering because it fosters desires and attachments that are impossible to satisfy. As the Buddha taught, we suffer not because we lack something, but because we cling to the delusion of a self capable of being satisfied by desire. These attachments then reinforce false conclusions about who we are, whether we view ourselves as inadequate, unworthy, or defined solely by our successes or failures. A profound solution to this dilemma lies in the Buddhist concept of anatta, or non-self. This teaching helps us understand that the self is not a permanent or independent entity, but a dynamic and ever-changing process. By practicing mindfulness, we can observe our thoughts without judgment, question their validity, and let go of beliefs that no longer serve us. For example, when a critical thought like, "I am a failure," arises, mindfulness invites us to recognize it as just a thought, not an ultimate truth. With time, this practice allows us to dismantle the false narratives that limit our growth. By shedding the weight of false identities, we free ourselves to explore new possibilities and approach life with confidence and openness. This practice fosters self-compassion, allowing us to treat ourselves with the same kindness we would offer a friend. It also enhances our relationships, as we engage with others from a place of authenticity rather than insecurity. To sum up, letting go of false conclusions about yourself is an act of liberation. It invites us to embrace the truth of our ever-changing nature and align with the wisdom of impermanence. As we release these limiting beliefs, we discover a deeper connection to ourselves and the world around us. This journey of self-discovery not only brings inner freedom, but also empowers us to live fully and authentically, unburdened by the shadows of the past. Lesson 6. Let go of harmful relationships. As we reach the final lesson in this journey of letting go, it becomes clear that true liberation is not just about releasing internal struggles, but also about addressing the external forces that shape our lives. After freeing ourselves from incorrect conclusions about who we are, the next essential step is to examine our connections and let go of harmful relationships. While relationships can be a source of support and joy, some connections weigh us down, stifling our growth and peace of mind. Holding on to toxic relationships often stems from fear of loneliness, fear of conflict, or fear of change. Yet, as the Buddha wisely taught, an insincere and evil friend is more to be feared than a wild beast. A wild beast may wound your body, but an evil friend will wound your mind. This highlights the necessity of discerning relationships that nurture our well-being from those that erode it. The root of the problem lies in attachment. We often stay in harmful relationships because of deep emotional bonds or the hope that things will improve. Sometimes it's because we conflate loyalty with endurance, believing that to leave is to fail. In other cases, our self-worth becomes tied to the validation we seek from the very people who harm us. These patterns create a cycle of dependency and self-doubt, keeping us stuck in environments that are neither loving nor constructive. The Buddhist concept of metta, or loving kindness, offers a powerful solution. Practicing metta involves cultivating a genuine wish for happiness and well-being for ourselves and others, even those who have caused us harm. This doesn't mean tolerating abuse or remaining in toxic dynamics. Instead, it encourages us to approach these situations with compassion and clarity. Letting go of harmful relationships begins with recognizing their impact and setting boundaries to protect our peace. For example, if a relationship consistently brings negativity or manipulative behavior, it may be time to create space and prioritize your own mental and emotional health. The act of letting go is not an act of abandonment, but one of self-respect. By stepping away from toxic relationships, we allow ourselves to heal and open the door to healthier, more supportive connections. This process requires courage, but it ultimately empowers us to reclaim our energy and focus it on relationships that inspire mutual respect and growth. So, let us free ourselves from the emotional weight of unhealthy dynamics and rediscover a sense of inner calm. In doing this, we can enhance our ability to form meaningful bonds with others based on authenticity and mutual care. Furthermore, this practice strengthens our relationship with ourselves, reinforcing the understanding that we deserve environments that nurture, not diminish, our well-being. You see, letting go of harmful relationships is an act of liberation. It allows us to align with the wisdom of impermanence, accepting that not all connections are meant to last. As we release these ties, we create space for joy, harmony, and the possibility of building a life surrounded by love and positivity. Now, we finally come to the end of the journey of learning letting go. Let us remember the central message. By letting go, we free ourselves from unnecessary suffering and discover inner freedom. Each step we take to release our attachments, whether to expectations, past wounds, or harmful relationships, brings us closer to a life of balance and fulfillment. So I invite you to take the first step. Start small. Let go of one thought, one expectation, or one resentment today, and see how it transforms your perspective and lightens your heart. These small acts of release will pave the way for profound personal growth and harmony. May you find peace and freedom through the practice of letting go. Thank you for joining me on this path. If this message inspired you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need it. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.